Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight, we follow a soft ember glowing in the hills of Ilocos, long before it becomes a flame the world cannot ignore. This is the story of Gabriela Silang, a woman shaped by prayer, love, loss, and a courage that rose gently even under the weight of empire. If this peaceful corner of time brings you comfort, you're always welcome to stay, to listen again, to quietly support its keeping. Morning in Santa begins not with sunlight, but with sound. The slow rustle of women lifting water from wells, the creak of wooden carts, the distant song of a church bell calling the faithful to prayer. In this rhythm of earth and devotion, Gabriela is born. The year is 1731, and Ilocos lies under the quiet weight of empire. The Spanish flag flutters above the church spire, its red cross a shadow on the white stone. Yet beneath it, life continues in small, enduring acts. The tending of rice, the weaving of cloth, the murmured Ave Maria before dawn. Gabriela's first cries blend into this chorus of survival. Her mother holds her close, whispering prayers that smell faintly of smoke and salt. Outside, the wind carries the scent of freshly tilled soil and the far-off roar of the Obra River. A restless current, cutting through mountains that have seen both conquest and defiance. From her earliest days, Gabriela learns that the world is divided between masters and the meek, friars and farmers, heaven and hunger. The priests speak of salvation, the people speak of rain. Every sermon comes with a tax, every blessing with a burden. But amid that weariness, there is beauty, the kind that lives quietly, like light caught in a drop of dew. She grows among the women who rise before the sun, their hands calloused yet gentle. They teach her that endurance is a kind of prayer. As she helps pound rice beside her mother, she listens to the older women speak in whispers of men taken by the guards, of villages burned for unpaid tribute. To Gabriela, these are not stories of defeat. They are lessons in what not to forget. The church looms over the town, both protector and chain. Its walls are cool and thick, the air inside smelling of candle wax and stone. Here, Gabriela learns her first letters, Latin syllables that roll off her tongue like unfamiliar rain. She loves the sound of them, though she knows their meaning is often used to keep her people quiet. The friars tell her that obedience is holy, but when she reads the scriptures, she finds something else. Stories of deliverance, of the lowly raised high. She reads of Deborah, of Judith, of women who defied kings and lifted nations from despair. Sometimes, in the stillness of Mass, she wonders if faith is meant to bind or to free. Outside the church, life unfolds in earthy tones. The markets buzz with barter and rumor. The air smells of vinegar and smoke. Carabaos drag carts through mud, and children chase each other between rows of tobacco. Gabriela walks among them with quiet curiosity, her dark eyes catching everything. Though small, she carries herself with a composure beyond her years, as if she already senses that her story will not be ordinary. Her father works the land, bowing under the same sun that burned his ancestors. When he speaks of Spain, it is with the wary shrug of a man who has stopped expecting justice. Yet, in the evenings, when the stars come out and the fields shimmer under moonlight, he tells her tales of the old Ilocos, of ancestors who fought with bolos and faith, of rivers that once ran red and free. Gabriela listens with her whole being, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust. In those moments, something unseen takes root in her, not anger, not rebellion, but an awareness that even in small lives, history hums softly, waiting for someone to give it voice. As she grows older, the shape of her world sharpens. The friar's sermons begin to sound more like commands, the governor's taxes more like chains. Yet Gabriela is not defiant, not yet. She learns to move like the women of her village, quietly, gracefully, surviving through stillness. But her silence holds a question. On feast days, when the church bells ring and the people kneel before the gilded altar, she watches the friars in their fine vestments and wonders, does God hear the prayers of the poor differently from those of the powerful? One evening, she stands by the riverbank, watching the current twist and shimmer under the fading light. The water rushes fast, impatient, untamed. She dips her hand into it, feeling its cold insistence against her skin. Somewhere upstream, it begins in the mountains. Somewhere downstream, it disappears into the sea. Between those two distances, it carries everything: silt, sorrow, hope. She wonders if her life will be the same, moving between what is given and what is possible. The seasons turn. She learns to weave, to cook, to tend the fields. The world tells her what a woman should be: obedient, gentle, content. Yet inside her grows a different rhythm, one that does not bow easily. She begins to see how her mother's quiet strength, her father's resignation, the friar's sermons, and the people's labor are all threads in the same tapestry, one woven by hands that never meant to let her kind rise. At dusk, she walks home through the narrow paths between rice paddies, her feet brushing against the cool blades of grass. Fireflies flicker above the fields like tiny lanterns. In the distance, the church bell tolls again, calling for evening prayer. Gabriela bows her head, but her thoughts drift elsewhere, to the vast unknown beyond the hills, to the feeling that life should be larger than endurance. Sometimes she dreams of flight, not with wings, but with courage. She imagines standing on a hilltop, wind lifting her hair, the world below waiting to be named anew. The people of Santa know her as quiet, pious, dutiful. They do not see the fire beginning to glow behind her calm eyes. Even she cannot name it yet, but it is there, waiting. A spark hidden beneath the folds of her faith. The Spanish friars preach from their pulpits about heaven. Gabriela begins to wonder if heaven might start here, in the courage to change what is broken, in the love that refuses to obey injustice. And though she does not yet know the name of the man who will awaken that fire fully, nor the wars that will follow, the land already seems to prepare itself. The river hums a restless tune, the mountains listen. The wind carries a whisper that will one day become her name. The child of Santa grows quietly, her dreams as unspoken as the stars. Yet even silence can hold the shape of destiny, and soon faith itself will lead her into its shadow. The church in Santa stands at the heart of the town like a sentinel of stone. Its thick walls keep out the heat, and its bells command the rhythm of life. At dawn, their ringing summons women from the fields, men from their sleep, and children from their dreams. It is here that young Gabriela spends her early years. Beneath the carved saints, beneath the watchful eyes of priests who preach in a tongue she only half understands. The friars move through the town like keepers of light. They teach, they baptize, they bless. They speak of heaven, but their hands count tribute. They promise salvation, but demand obedience. For many, they are the bridge between the suffering of earth and the hope of eternity. For Gabriela, they are something more complex. The first faces of power she learns to study. She comes to the church not just to pray, but to learn. A sympathetic priest, kinder than most, sees her curiosity and allows her to stay after lessons. She traces the curling letters of Latin prayers, her small fingers trembling slightly over the parchment. Dominus vobiscum, she whispers, feeling the weight and mystery of the words. She does not know yet that language can be both key and cage. As she grows, she begins to notice things. The priest's robes shimmer with embroidery while the farmer's clothes are patched and worn thin. The offerings brought to the altar, rice, eggs, coins, come from hands that have little to spare. She watches as the friars bless the offerings and then feast on them in the rectory after Mass. The candles flicker against their gold cups, and Gabriela feels the faint ache of contradiction. Still, she believes. The hymns soothe her. The scent of incense fills her with quiet wonder. When the choir sings Ave Maria, she feels her heart rise, soft and trembling like a bird at dawn. There is peace here, she tells herself, though sometimes it feels like the peace of surrender. Her mother kneels beside her, eyes closed in trust, lips moving silently through each prayer. Faith is what holds the women of Santa together. It keeps them from collapsing beneath the weight of days that demand too much. For them, the church is not a question, it is a shelter from questions. But Gabriela, even as a child, feels the distance between faith and those who claim to guard it. The priests say, "The meek shall inherit the earth." But she wonders when. And what earth is left to inherit when so much of it already belongs to the crown and the cross? She never speaks these thoughts aloud. To question is to sin is to risk damnation. Yet, when she looks up at the carved figure of the Virgin, she does not see submission. She sees strength wrapped in gentleness, endurance shaped into grace. Gabriela prays not to be quiet, but to be steadfast. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the sun turns the walls amber and the cicadas drone outside, she helps sweep the church floor. The friar watches her, nodding in approval, calling her Niña Buena. She bows her head, but her mind drifts elsewhere, to the farmers toiling in the fields, to the smell of sweat and soil, to the wind that knows no master. It is in these moments that something begins to shift inside her. Faith, once only comfort, begins to sharpen into awareness. The words of the Catechism, obedience, humility, submission, begin to taste different on her tongue. She repeats them as she must, yet feels their edges. At times, she lingers near the confessional, listening to the murmurs of penitent voices. She hears the women whispering their weariness, their fears of hunger, their sins of despair. The friar's voice answers with absolution, soft and distant, like rain that never quite reaches the ground. Outside, the world continues as it always has. But inside Gabriela's heart, a small rebellion begins, not against God, but against the way his name is used. The church teaches her discipline. It teaches her the power of words, the beauty of ceremony, the value of endurance. But it also teaches her what it means to be unseen, to exist in silence beneath the weight of others' voices. And in learning that, she begins to recognize her own. Years pass. Gabriela becomes known for her grace, her piety, her quiet strength. She attends every feast day, kneels at every procession, lights candles for the souls of the dead. But behind her lowered gaze, her mind watches, records, questions. She begins to read more, not just prayers, but stories from the scriptures. The women who move through those pages call to her. Ruth, Esther, Judith, they are not meek, they are brave. They do not wait for deliverance, they act. She reads their stories again and again, until they feel less like distant saints and more like voices within her own pulse. One evening, she finds herself alone in the church. The last of the candles flicker, their flames bending in the wind that slips through the open door. She kneels before the altar, the silence heavy with memory. She whispers a prayer, not for safety, but for courage. The words surprise her. They do not come from any book. They rise from her own heart. In that moment, she feels something subtle yet immense, as if faith has turned its face toward her, not as a command, but as a companion. She realizes that belief need not be blind to be true, that obedience is not the same as devotion. When she leaves the church that night, the stars are bright over the Ilocos hills. The moonlight spills across the path like a blessing. She walks home slowly, her rosary cool in her hand. Behind her, the church bell tolls once, deep, solemn, echoing through the valley. It sounds less like a call to kneel and more like a call to rise. In the days that follow, Gabriela continues her life as before. The chores, the prayers, the endless rhythm of survival. Yet those who know her begin to sense something changed. Her eyes hold the same gentleness, but there is a steadiness there now, a quiet fire that does not burn, only glows. She does not yet know what shape that fire will take, nor what path it will lead her down. For now, she carries it like a hidden candle, lighting her own way through the dim corridors of faith and fate. And as the bells fade into the distance, she walks toward a future that neither the priests nor the stars can predict, where devotion will meet destiny and love will awaken rebellion. In the warm stillness of an Ilocos afternoon, the world seems to hold its breath. The scent of dried tobacco, leaves drifts through the air, mingling with the murmur of prayers from a distant chapel. Beneath the woven roofs of Santa, preparations are quietly underway for a marriage, one not born from love, but from arrangement. Gabriela stands before a mirror polished from river stone. The reflection staring back at her is young, barely 16. Her skin glows with the innocence of mountain sunlight, yet her eyes carry a shadow of understanding far older. Around her, the women bustle softly, fastening her veil, adjusting her gown of hand-woven cloth, whispering blessings that sound more like farewells. Her mother's hands tremble slightly as she pins a rosary at her daughter's chest. "He is kind," she says gently, as if kindness were enough to build a future upon. Gabriela nods because it is what is expected. The match, after all, promises stability, the comfort of a home, the end of want, a life secured by the wealth of a man who has seen twice her years and outlived his first wife. The church bell tolls. When she steps into the chapel, the air feels heavy, almost sacred in its silence. Her groom waits near the altar, dressed in fine linen that smells faintly of sandalwood and age. His face, lined and solemn, softens when he sees her. Around them, the friars chant in Latin, the same language that once felt like music to her young ears, now echoing like a prayer half meant. The vows come and go, carried by voices that are not their own. For better or for worser, till death do us part. Words float between them like dry leaves, weightless yet final. The ring, cool and metallic, slides onto her finger. Applause ripples briefly through the pews, polite and practiced. Outside, the sun continues its slow descent, indifferent to the union sealed beneath its light. That night, Gabriela sits by the window of her new home. The house is large, Wooden walls, high ceilings, floors polished smooth by generations of footsteps. A crucifix hangs in every room, and candles flicker before the icons of saints. She listens to the sound of wind brushing against the Capis windows, wondering if freedom has its own voice. Her husband speaks to her kindly with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He asks about her family, her prayers, her health. He calls her my dove, and though his tone is gentle, the name feels like a cage. She answers softly, dutifully. Gratitude is expected, and she offers it as one might offer a gift wrapped in silence. Days fold into weeks and weeks into months. Gabriela learns the routines of a wife, lighting candles, preparing meals, attending mass, sitting quietly beside her husband during long, uneventful evenings. She keeps her hands busy, weaving cloth, polishing silver, arranging flowers by the altar. Yet her mind wanders to the hills she once climbed barefoot, to the laughter of girls her age, to the whisper of the river calling beyond the fields. Her husband treats her well, but love does not bloom in comfort alone. It needs the risk of the unknown, the spark of shared wonder, things their marriage does not know how to hold. In the evenings, she often finds herself staring at the oil lamps, watching their slow, wavering light. She begins to understand how even beauty can become confinement, how gentleness can mask a deeper stillness. The rosary beads slip through her fingers, one after another, each prayer a step deeper into reflection. Sometimes, she catches her own reflection in the polished wood of the furniture. A young woman already living like someone much older, her face serene, her spirit quietly restless. The world calls it contentment. She calls it waiting. Then one season, illness enters the house like an uninvited wind. Her husband, once strong and deliberate, weakens. The doctors come, bearing herbs and holy oils. The friars pray, sprinkling water over his bed. Gabriela sits beside him, night after night, her hands folded, her eyes wide awake. She tends to him with quiet devotion, not out of love alone, but from the deep compassion she feels for all who suffer. When he murmurs her name, she answers with gentleness, smoothing the sweat from his brow, and when the end comes, it does not roar, it sighs. One breath less, one candle flickering out, the house falls silent. In the days that follow, Gabriela wears black. The mourning veil feels lighter than the expectations she has shed. The villagers come, offering sympathy wrapped in murmured prayers. She is blessed, they say, to have known such a good man. She bows her head, accepting their words with grace. But inside her, something shifts, not sorrow, but stillness, like the calm after a storm that never truly began. Widowhood, for many, is a door that closes. For Gabriela it opens. She begins to walk again. Through the markets, through the roads leading to the river, through the narrow paths between the fields. The air feels new, raw, alive. The church bells still ring, but their echo no longer commands her steps. At dusk, she returns home to an empty house. The silence no longer frightens her, it speaks. It tells her of time unclaimed, of a life still unfolding. She lights a single candle before the Virgin and kneels. Her prayer is not for comfort or wealth, but for meaning, for the courage to understand what her life is truly meant for. Some nights, she dreams of the river again, its current strong, untamed, flowing toward a horizon she cannot yet see. In those dreams, she is not bound by veils or vows. She stands on the riverbank, her hair unpinned, her gaze steady. In the daylight, she carries that image with her, the people still call her Doña Gabriela, the widow of a respected man. But the title feels distant, like a garment borrowed from someone else. She feels the pulse of the earth under her bare feet, the memory of childhood whispering in her veins. Something within her begins to awaken. A quiet, knowing that the world beyond her home is waiting for her to step into it to meet what destiny will bring. The sound of hooves on the road begins to reach the town again. Travelers from the mountains, merchants from the valleys, soldiers passing through. Among them, one day soon will come a man whose words burn like the wind, Diego Silang. But tonight, that meeting is still a dream carried on the wind. Gabriela stands at her window once more. The moonlight glows across her face, soft yet unyielding. Somewhere in the distance, the river murmurs its eternal song, one she is finally ready to hear. The widow breathes in the night air, neither bound by grief nor by fear. Somewhere beyond the hills, the road begins, and down that road, destiny quietly waits to meet her. The road from vegan to the mountains winds like a thought that refuses to end. Full of turns, dust, and the scent of river wind, it is a place between worlds, the flatlands of the colonists' reach and the highlands where the natives still speak to the spirits of their ancestors. Gabriela rides this road one afternoon, her shawl drawn against the sunlight, her heart carrying the quiet weight of widowhood and the even quieter stirrings of freedom. The clatter of hooves fills the silence. A small procession of men appears ahead, their faces sun-browned, their eyes restless. Among them rides a man with an air both grounded and storm-touched, Diego Silang. His horse moves with the ease of one accustomed to command. Yet there is humility in his posture, a sense that he carries not just his own fate, but that of a people waiting in silence. Their meeting is not marked by thunder or prophecy, only by a stillness that feels like recognition. He greets her with a courteous nod, the kind that belongs more to the soul than to formality. Words are exchanged, simple at first, about the heat, the distance, the road's dangers. But beneath the ordinary rises something electric, a quiet, mutual knowing that their paths were never meant to remain apart. In Diego's voice, Gabriela hears the cadence of the mountains, strong, unbending, ancient. He speaks of injustices, of the friar's greed, of the taxes that bleed Ilocano farmers dry, of the cruelty that hides behind the cross. But he does not speak with bitterness. He speaks with vision. He believes that the land can belong to those who till it, that the people can pray in their own tongue, that faith need not be chained to foreign altars. As they ride together through the golden stretch of afternoon, Gabriela listens. Not as a widow or a woman seeking company, but as someone who has long been searching for the sound of her own thoughts echoed in another's words. Each idea he shares feels like a spark lighting something dormant within her. When they part at dusk, the horizon burns with the last of the sun, and neither wishes to turn away. In the days that follow, their paths cross again. Vegan, though proud and distant under Spanish watch, cannot contain the growing murmur of unrest. The markets buzz with rumour of uprisings in Pangasinan, of revolts crushed in Cagayan, of priests whispering warnings. And in the midst of this, Gabriela finds herself drawn again to Diego's company, not by chance, but by choice. He tells her of his travels to Manila, how he once worked as a courier for the Spanish authorities, carrying messages across the provinces. It was on those roads that he began to see the contradictions. The wealth of the few built on the hunger of the many. He had seen men whipped for refusing tribute, women punished for questioning priests. He had seen the faces of children whose eyes already held surrender. "I thought I could serve them," he admits softly, looking out toward the western hills. "But each message I carried became a chain in my hand. I was part of the same bondage I despised." Gabriela's eyes do not waver. Then why not break it? That question, simple, clear, unflinching, becomes the seed of their partnership. Their courtship unfolds not in grand gestures, but in the small, fierce intimacies of purpose. They meet by the riverside, under the pretext of trade and travel. They speak of faith and power, of the courage it would take to unmake the world and build it again. Sometimes Diego brings her books or papers, their pages marked with notes, thoughts about freedom, taxation, and the ancient right of the Ilocano to self-rule. She reads them by lamplight, her heart thundering not with romance, but with awakening. They fall in love the way storms gather, quietly at first, then all at once. To Gabriela, Diego is not merely a man. He is the embodiment of the question she has carried since girlhood. What if obedience is not the highest form of faith? And to Diego, Gabriela is the unexpected answer. A woman who listens with intelligence, speaks with fire, and holds her ground with grace. Her silence is never submission, it is thought. Her words are not loud, but they pierce through hesitation like light through a church window. In her presence, he begins to believe that freedom is not only a man's calling, it is the heartbeat of the land itself. When they marry, there are no grand processions, no serenades beneath the windows of Vegan's elite. Their union is marked by simplicity, a vow exchanged in the quiet of dusk, under a roof that leaks when the rain grows heavy. But in that modest space, history shifts, for theirs is a marriage not founded on possession, but on partnership. Gabriela, who once stood alone beside the grave of her first husband, now stands beside a man who sees her not as ornament or shadow, but as equal, as comrade. They share a home built on laughter, debate, and sleepless nights spent planning. The world outside still belongs to Spain, but inside their walls, Ilocos belongs to them, and to the dream they nurture in secret. When Diego speaks of rebellion, Gabriela does not shrink back. She listens, questions, strengthens. Her courage feeds his faith steadies hers. Together they begin gathering allies. Men from the farms, traders from the coast, women who have lost sons to the cruelty of tribute and conscription. Word spreads through the valleys. Silang is preparing something. The friars begin to worry. The officials send spies. But the people whisper a new word, pagasa, hope. On nights when the world feels too heavy, Diego sits by the window, watching the stars. Gabriela joins him, their silence bound not by fear, but by understanding. She knows the cost of what they are building. Freedom is never won without loss. Yet she also knows that silence, the kind forced upon generations, is a deeper death. As the candlelight trembles, she leans against him and whispers, "If the road is long, we will walk it together." And Diego, wary but steadfast, answers, "Until the end, my love, until the end." Outside, the wind moves through the fields like a promise. The revolution is still a dream, fragile and dangerous, but within these walls, it has already begun. Not with guns or banners, but with two hearts bound by vision. Before the first shot is fired, there must first be a dream brave enough to be spoken. In the stillness of their home, that dream begins to breathe, softly, dangerously, as if history itself is holding its breath for what comes next. The air in Ilocos grows thick with heat and hunger. Beneath the wide skies, the fields shimmer gold, but the people bow not from reverence, only exhaustion. The friars' bells still ring at dawn, summoning worship, but their echoes carry a new weight. Each toll is a reminder the empire's reach is long and its appetite endless. Spain demands tribute, timber, tobacco, and obedience. The farmers bend over their ploughs, their hands dark with earth, their shoulders burning beneath the sun. Yet, when the harvest comes, much of it is carted away, loaded onto ships that vanish toward Manila, toward Madrid. What remains is barely enough to survive. Gabriela sees it all. The hollowed faces of mothers, the cracked feet of men who have worked beyond the mercy of their strength. Once, she prayed that endurance would be enough. Now, she begins to see that endurance alone is another form of captivity. At the edge of every village there is talk, hushed, cautious, carried in the breath between sentences. They say Diego Silang rides from town to town, calling for justice. That he defies the alcaldes and challenges the friars. That he has spoken to the British, the enemies of Spain, and that help may come from across the sea. To some, he is reckless. To others, a hero. To Gabriela, he is a mirror, one that reflects the restlessness already stirring within her. When Diego returns from his journeys, his eyes burn with the light of faraway fires. He tells her of farmers who have taken up bolos, of soldiers who question their loyalty, of elders who remember the time before the friars ruled the land like gods. Each story lands in Gabriela's heart like a seed. At night, when the cicadas sing and the mountains turn violet beneath the moon, they sit together by the open window. Diego speaks of a land where the Ilocanos decide their own fate, where labor is not tribute and prayers are not currency. Gabriela listens in silence, but her silence is not stillness. It is the listening of someone whose spirit is learning a new tongue. Freedom. It is a word that trembles on her lips, still strange and bright as a star just risen. She repeats it quietly in her mind, shaping it into breath. As the months unfold, rebellion begins to move like wind through cane fields. Unseen, yet unmistakable, letters pass hand to hand, written in secret codes. Rice barns hide muskets. Bells in distant parishes toll twice when Spanish soldiers draw near. The world around Gabriela begins to change its rhythm, slower, heavier, charged with waiting. When Diego calls his first council of men in the highlands, Gabriela stands at the edge of the gathering. The air smells of wood smoke and pine. She watches as Diego's voice carries over the crowd, calm, steady. Not the cry of a warrior, but the reasoning of a man who believes justice can still be built from words. He speaks of fairness, not vengeance, of reform, not chaos. But beneath his measured tone, Gabriela hears another truth, that peace built on chains is only another kind of war. When he finishes, the men rise to pledge their allegiance. They bring what little they can, a musket, a blade, a sack of rice, a promise. Gabriela steps forward, her veil catching the mountain wind. Diego turns toward her, and in that moment, their eyes hold the same flame. She is not there as a wife nor as a widow in waiting. She stands beside him as equal. That night, as they ride home through the mountain paths, fireflies shimmer in the dark like sparks of an unseen forge. Gabriela feels the weight of the world shifting. The empire is vast, yes. Its ships, its soldiers, its gold. But so too is the quiet courage of a people who have begun to believe that obedience is not the only virtue. In the weeks that follow, Diego begins to train his men. They learn to move through the valleys unseen, to strike and vanish like shadows. Gabriela rides with them sometimes, her hair bound, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She learns to read the signs of the land, the curve of the trails, the silence before rain. The mountains, once a backdrop to her life, now become a living map of resistance. The friars call Diego a heretic. The soldiers call him a traitor. But in the small towns, mothers whisper his name with gratitude. Gabriela hears it in the markets, in the weaving rooms, even in the prayers of the old women who still light candles at the church altars. One evening, a storm breaks over the valley. Rain lashes the roofs and floods the paths, but Gabriela does not retreat indoors. She stands beneath the downpour, feeling it cleans her, as though the heavens themselves are washing away the years of submission. In the flashes of lightning, she remembers her younger self, the girl who once bowed before priests, who measured virtue in silence. That girl is gone now, or perhaps she has only awakened into her truest form. When Diego returns soaked and muddy from the villages, he finds her standing in the rain, her face turned upward. She smiles faintly. "The storm will pass," he says. "Maybe," she answers. But some storms are meant to stay. From that night, the world seems sharper, more fragile, as though history itself has begun to breathe. The rebellion is no longer a rumor. It is a pulse that beats through every heart that dares to hope. And yet, hope has its shadows. Gabriela senses it. The way fear begins to trail behind courage, the way betrayal follows faith. The Spanish authorities grow suspicious. Spies move among them disguised as farmers. Priests begin to question who still confesses honestly. But Gabriela does not waver. She has learned that faith is not only in churches, it can live in action, in defiance, in love that chooses truth over comfort. In Diego's hands, she sees the map of the north. Ilocos, Candon, Obra, Began, each name a promise, each town a spark waiting to be lit. He traces the routes with his finger, and she realizes that he is not simply plotting roads. He is charting the rebirth of their people, and she, beside him, will carry the flame. The days shorten, the nights grow louder with the murmur of plans, and in the stillness between heartbeats, Gabriela feels it. The shift, the awakening, the inevitability. What began as love now moves beyond it. Love built the fire, purpose keeps it burning. Soon, the fire will leap beyond their reach, toward vegan, toward victory, and toward loss. But tonight, as the embers glow in the north, Gabriela learns the truth that will guide her forever, that freedom, once kindled, cannot be unlearned. Morning rises over Ilocos like a held breath. The streets of Vegan shimmer in the light, their cobblestones still slick from the night's rain. Somewhere, far away, a bell rings. Not the careful toll of the friars, but a wild, uneven peal breaking through the silence like a declaration. Freedom. For the first time, the bells of the north ring not for mass, but for rebellion. Gabriela stands beside Diego at the edge of the plaza, the old heart of the city. Soldiers and farmers alike fill the square, their faces alight with disbelief and joy. The Spanish officials have fled, their flags torn down from the windows of the Ayuntamiento. In their place, the people raise banners of their own making. Rough cloth stitched with the colours of the land, sun faded yet radiant. The air smells of smoke and sugarcane, of sweat and rain, of something raw and new. Diego's men chant his name, their voices echoing through the narrow streets. From the balconies, women lean out, throwing flowers, camellias and bougainvillea, as though blessing the morning with colour. For a moment, history trembles. Gabriela watches Diego, and for a heartbeat, he is no longer the man she met on a dusty road, but a symbol, the embodiment of every silent defiance that ever rose in these hills. His eyes gleam with both triumph and the heavy knowing that follows it. He raises his hand, and the crowd falls quiet. "My brothers," he calls out, voice strong enough to cut through the wind. "Today, we are free, not because the empire gave us mercy, but because we remembered who we are." Cheers erupt again, swelling like a tide. Yet beneath the roar, Gabriela feels something fragile, a stillness like glass before it breaks. She sees it in the edges of the plaza, the wary glances of merchants unsure whom to serve now, the priests who stand in the shadows of their churches, hands trembling over their rosaries. Freedom, she realizes, is not a single sunrise. It is a fire, beautiful, consuming, but always hungry. Later that day, Diego walks through the streets with his men, securing the town. Gabriela follows at a distance, watching the small miracles unfold. Farmers who lift their heads without fear. Children who play barefoot near the fountain, no longer chased away by guards. Elders who whisper blessings as Diego passes. But in the same streets, she also sees the weight of what's been done. Spanish homes abandoned, soldiers lying still where the fighting was fiercest, the faint smell of gunpowder clinging to the stones. The city, alive with victory, already bears the scars of what it cost. In the convent courtyard, a group of friars has been gathered. Diego orders that they be treated with respect. "We fight not against faith," he reminds his men, "but against the chains that have worn its name." Gabriela looks at their pale faces, their eyes hollow with fear. For a moment, she feels pity, but she also remembers the years of cruelty, the taxes, the humiliation of her people beneath the weight of their sermons. Compassion, she realizes, is not the same as forgetting. As the day stretches on, Began transforms. The church bells ring again, this time at Diego's command. Not for worship, but as a signal to every town nearby. The Ilocanos have taken their city back. Smoke curls above rooftops as the people light fires in the streets, celebrating not destruction, but renewal. Gabriela rides through the plaza at dusk, her horse's hooves striking sparks on the stones. The sky burns orange, reflected in the polished roofs. Children run behind her laughing. Someone begins to sing, an old folk song, once whispered in secret, now rising freely into the evening air. The melody fills her chest. For the first time, she allows herself to smile, not with the quiet patience of endurance, but with the open joy of someone who has witnessed the impossible. And yet, when the crowd fades into the alleys and the fires begin to dim, Gabriela's smile falters. The horizon darkens, and in the west, she sees distant clouds gathering, the color of iron, the shape of coming storms. That night, she and Diego sit by candlelight in the governor's old quarters. The furniture is heavy and ornate, the walls still hung with portraits of Spanish kings. The candle burns low between them, its flame dancing with every breath of wind. It's only the beginning. Diego says quietly. His voice carries both pride and wariness. They will come back, with soldiers, with ships, with vengeance. Gabriela nods. Then we will meet them, She looks out the window, where the plaza lies silent under the moon. The flowers that were thrown in celebration now wilt on the stones. She knows the Spanish will not forget this humiliation. Empires never sleep through defiance. Outside, the night hums with both triumph and unease. Somewhere, a rooster crows, confused by the firelight that still flickers in the streets. Gabriela turns back to Diego. When the fire comes, she murmurs, but will not ask if we are ready. He takes her hand. Then we must be ready all the same. In the days that follow, letters arrive. Some from allies offering support, others carrying warnings. There are whispers that Spanish reinforcements have landed in the south, that loyalists have begun to gather in secret. Still, the people of Vegan move with renewed purpose. The markets open again, but now the traders speak of freedom as though it were something they could measure, weigh, and trade. Every night, Gabriela walks through the city. She watches as the fires burn low in the courtyards, as the families tell their children stories of the rebellion. She listens to the music. Tambourines, wooden flutes, the low hum of voices that no longer fear to be heard. But she also listens to the silence between those sounds. It is in that silence that truth lives. The understanding that the empire is vast, that this victory, radiant as it is, may not endure. Still, she does not let the fear settle. She wraps herself in the quiet dignity of resolve. She has learned that freedom is not a single act of conquest, but 1,000 small refusals. To kneel, to despair, to forget. One evening, as she stands on the balcony overlooking the plaza, the wind from the north brushes her face. It carries the smell of the mountains, pine, rain, and memory. She closes her eyes and breathes deeply. The rebellion burns brightly now, but she can already feel how thin the flame has become, stretched by hope and hunger alike. She knows that if they are to survive, they must learn to protect not only their land, but their spirit, for it is the spirit that empires fear most. And in that quiet moment, beneath a sky of smoke and stars, Gabriela prays, not to win, but to endure. The bells of Vegan still echo through the night, carrying both triumph and warning. And as their sound drifts toward the darkened hills, Gabriela senses what comes next. That every victory, like fire, must one day face the wind. The air in Vegan has changed. The sweetness of triumph fades, replaced by something heavier. A scent like metal before rain. Beneath the surface of celebration, Gabriela feels the quiet shift, the tremor that comes before the earth begins to move. The rebellion has taken root, but its soil is uncertain. The people who once shouted Diego's name with faith now whisper it with fear. The friars, though stripped of their power, still have their tongues, and their tongues are sharp. In sermons spoken behind closed doors, they call Diego a heretic, a puppet of foreign enemies. They speak of divine punishment, of rebellion as sin. The words spread faster than fire. Still, Diego writes. Each night, beneath a flickering lamp, he bends over the table, his hand steady despite the fatigue. His letters travel far beyond the mountains. To the British forces in Manila, who now occupy the city after defeating the Spaniards in war, he pleads not for conquest, but for alliance. The British, he believes, might support the Ilocano cause, recognizing in them a chance to weaken Spain's hold on the islands. Gabriela watches him as he writes. The candlelight softens his features, but she sees the worry etched in the corners of his eyes. Do you trust them? She asks quietly. I trust only the opportunity, he replies. and the hope that they see what we fight for. Hope. How light a word it seems, and yet how heavy it feels now. The letters leave by messenger, carried through the mountains and rivers, through days of rain and risk. Each time a rider departs, Gabriela feels a piece of herself go with him, fluttering toward the horizon like a fragile prayer. Days turn into weeks. The British do not answer, or perhaps their answer has not survived the roads that swallow so many messages before they arrive, and in the silence that follows, doubt begins to creep through the ranks. Whispers take shape in the corners of the markets, in the low hum of evening gatherings. The British will not come. Some say they will trade with Spain again and forget us. Others murmur that Diego has already betrayed them, that he seeks power, not freedom, and that his wife sits in the governor's house like a queen. Gabriela hears these murmurs as she walks through the streets. She does not respond. She has learned that anger gives gossip its breath, but silence, she fears, can also feed it. The soldiers who once greeted her with respect now avert their eyes. Even among their closest allies, she feels the pull of distance, the kind that grows not from hate but from fear of being on the losing side. And still, Diego holds the center. He walks through Beacon with calm dignity, his voice a steadying flame. He meets with village leaders, promising unity, urging faith. But Gabriela can sense his wariness. His steps are slower, his words softer, as if even he feels the shadow lengthening behind him. One afternoon, the wind from the sea carries a strange quiet. The city feels hollow, its streets lined with the ghosts of celebrations past. Diego sits by the window, scanning the horizon, and in his hands, another letter trembles. It is not from the British. The message is from within their own ranks. A report that one of his captains has been seen meeting with Spanish loyalists. Gold has passed between them. Promises too. Gabriela reads the words and feels a chill deeper than any cold wind. "Who?" she asks. Diego hesitates before answering. Miguel. The same man who once rode beside them through the hills, whose laughter had filled the nights after victory. She remembers him standing by the fire, singing songs of defiance. To think that even he could turn. Why? She whispers. The Spaniards have a way, Diego replies quietly. They offer forgiveness, and they know how to make a man believe he wants it. That night, Gabriela cannot sleep. The moonlight spills across the floor, pale and unsteady, like the edge of a broken dream. She walks to the window and looks out over Vegan. The city lies in uneasy silence. A dog barks, then another. Then all falls still again. In that stillness, she feels it. The shift, the nearing of something vast and irreversible. The rebellion has become a house built of faith and fear, and now the cracks have begun to show. When dawn comes, Diego gathers his men. His voice remains calm, though Gabriela hears the sorrow beneath it. We have enemies not only beyond the walls, he tells them, but among those who once stood beside us. But our cause is still just. Hold fast. Some nod, others look away. The loyalty that once burned bright now smoulders uncertain, like coals waiting to die or reignite. Days later, the message from the British finally arrives. It is not what Diego hoped for. The letter is polite, distant, full of promises that promise nothing. The British, caught in their own ambitions, see the Ilocano uprising not as a brotherhood of the oppressed, but as a useful distraction. Diego reads their words in silence, then folds the letter with steady hands. So, he murmurs. We stand alone. Gabriela places her hand on his. We always have. Outside, the rain begins to fall, soft, persistent, like a lament from the heavens. She watches the drops slide down the glass, tracing paths like ink on paper. Letters have carried their hopes far and wide, but in the end, only betrayal has returned. That evening, she walks through the marketplace. The stalls are empty, the laughter gone. People glance at her, then look away. She does not blame them. Fear has a scent, and it moves faster than courage. When she returns home, Diego sits by the window again, staring out toward the darkened streets. The candle beside him has nearly burned to the end, wax spilling down its sides like melted tears. There is still time, she says softly, though she does not know if she believes it. There is always time, Diego answers, until the moment there isn't. The wind blows through the shutters, carrying with it the faintest scent of smoke. Far away, faint but familiar, somewhere in the north, a skirmish has begun. Somewhere the rebellion bleeds. Gabriela closes her eyes. She feels the weight of inevitability pressing close, like a storm gathering over the sea. In her heart, she knows the letters have failed, but something else remains. Something not written, not sent, not betrayed. Resolve, it glows quietly within her, steady as the final ember of a dying fire. For if betrayal has many faces, so does faith, and hers, she decides, will not falter. The night deepens. Rain hushes the city, but within its stillness the storm begins to form. And as Gabriela listens to its distant rumble, she knows. The next sound she hears will not be letters at her door, but the echo of loss. The death of Diego is coming. Night descends quietly over Obra. The river gleams with moonlight, flowing like a silver wound through the darkened valley. The air is still, too still, as if the wind itself holds its breath. Somewhere, an owl cries from the cliffs, and its echo folds into the silence like a warning. Inside a small encampment, the flicker of firelight traces the outline of faces weary from battle and hunger, faces that have learned to smile only in the dark. Gabriela sits beside Diego, her husband and general, as he writes by the trembling light. His hand, once so sure, hesitates for a moment above the paper. The men grow tired. He murmurs, not to her but to the night. But we must hold on a little longer. His words are meant for the page. A message to his scattered commanders, or perhaps to himself. Gabriela says nothing. She knows that hope, like ink, stains most deeply when it begins to fade. Beyond the camp, the Ilocos hills whisper with rumor. Spanish loyalists are moving. Unseen shapes in the forests, loyal to neither crown nor rebellion, but only to the chance of survival. The rebellion that once rode with promise now flickers like a dying ember. Supplies are gone, and men desert quietly in the night. Gabriela feels it, the cold breath of something closing in. Yet Diego remains steady. He rides between villages, his presence alone enough to stir courage. The people still call him the voice of the North, and in their eyes burns a faith stronger than fear. But even voices fall silent when the world conspires against them. It happens suddenly, as most deaths do. One morning in December, the air smells of rain and smoke. Diego rides out with a small escort to meet with supposed allies. Men who had promised new strength, new supplies, a chance to strike again. Gabriela watches him go, her heart a knot of unspoken warnings. He smiles at her before he leaves, the same smile he wore when he first led men into rebellion, proud, unbroken, impossibly alive. By midday, The rain has stopped. The clouds scatter like ghosts. The camp waits restless. And then far off comes the sound, not thunder, not hoofbeats, but something sharper, the crack of a rifle. A bird rises from the trees, then another, and silence falls again. When the messenger arrives at dusk, his face is pale, his words stumbling. Gabriela does not need to hear them all. She sees it in his eyes, the truth already written there, heavy and unkind. Diego Silang is dead, shot through the back by one of his own, a man he trusted. The rebellion's light has gone out. For a long while, Gabriela does not move. The world seems to dissolve into sound. The rain returning, the river murmuring through the dark, the low, animal cries of grief breaking from men who had followed Diego for years. But she sits still, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last ember of sunlight fades behind the mountains. It feels wrong that the world still turns, that water still flows. Death, she thinks, should stop time, but it never does. Later, when his body is brought to her, wrapped in a cloak, heavy with rain and blood, she kneels beside him. Her hands tremble only once. She does not cry. Instead, she whispers his name, not as a farewell, but as a vow. Around her, the men wait uncertain, looking to her as though she might speak the words that will anchor them again. But what words could hold against the sea of loss now spilling through the valley? So she rises slowly and turns her face to the night. "The fight is not over," she says. Her voice is calm, almost too calm. "Not while I still draw breath." In that moment, something changes. The soldiers see it. A light behind her eyes, fierce and steady. The same fire that once lived in Diego now burns in her. She becomes, in their silence, not just his widow, but his echo, his continuation. Grief, she learns, is a strange kind of forge. It does not break the heart, it reshapes it. The pain sharpens her resolve, and the tears she refuses to shed harden into purpose. The rebellion may have lost its voice, but it has found its soul. Days pass. The Spaniards celebrate in Vigan, their bells tolling victory. The friars preach of divine justice, of God's hand striking down rebellion. But in the highlands, among the mist and pine, a new name begins to travel from village to village. Gabriela Silang. She moves quietly, gathering the remnants of Diego's army, calling them not to despair but to remembrance. He died for freedom, she tells them, and freedom cannot die. Her words carry in the wind, into valleys and fields, stirring hearts that had grown cold. Women bring food and news. Men return from hiding. The people of Ilocos begin to rise again, not in rage, but in mourning made strong. At night, Gabriela sits by the river, the same river that once mirrored their laughter. The stars shimmer above, indifferent and eternal. She speaks softly into the darkness, as though Diego might still hear. "They took you," she whispers, "but they will not take what you believed." And sometimes, when the wind shifts through the trees, she almost thinks she hears a reply, faint, like a remembered promise. Her transformation is quiet but absolute. No longer the general's wife, no longer the woman behind the rebellion. She becomes its beating heart. The mountains whisper her name now with reverence and fear. To the Spaniards, she is a threat reborn. To her people, she is hope resurrected. In the stillness of her grief, Gabriela has found her destiny. She trains the men by torchlight, studies the paths Diego once took, and vows to finish what he began. The sword that once hung at his side now rests at hers. The fire that consumed Vigan once burns again, not in the streets, but in her veins. Death, she realizes, is not an end but a calling. Diego's fall has given her wings she never sought, courage she never asked for. What began as love has become something larger than life, a promise made between the living and the dead. Night deepens over the valley once more. The river carries Diego's reflection into the endless sea, but beside it, another reflection rises, fiercer, unbroken, alive. For in the heart of loss, Gabriela has found not an ending, but a beginning, and the next dawn will carry her name. Night gathers around the mountains of Ilocos, heavy with the scent of rain and ash. The roads that once carried the sound of hooves now lie quiet, as though the land itself mourns. Gabriela Silang is gone. The man who once lifted the banner of revolt has fallen beneath betrayal's hand. Yet in the shadows he leaves behind, a figure moves, silent, resolute, cloaked not in mourning but in destiny. Gabriela rides again. She wears no jewels, no veil. Her garments are black, the colour of earth after fire. Upon her shoulders, grief sits like armour, cold, weighty, unyielding. The people who see her say that her silence speaks louder than any trumpet. She does not cry before them. She does not tremble. Her pain has hardened into a vow. The dream that once belonged to Diego will not be buried with him. The horse beneath her is white as the mountain mist, a living contrast to her dark attire. It was Diego's favourite steed, restless, proud, unwilling to bow. Now it carries her through the valleys where rebellion first took root. Each hoofbeat sounds like an oath renewed. The Ilocos wind whispers her name as though the hills themselves have chosen a new leader. Gabriela, not widow, not relic, but flame. The first to kneel before her are the same men who once followed Diego. They are weary, their hearts torn between loyalty and despair. When they see her, they hesitate, not out of doubt, but awe. For here stands not a grieving wife, but a figure reborn in defiance. Her eyes, dark and still, hold the reflection of every loss the people have endured. When she speaks, her voice is low but steady, like a river under moonlight. "We will not die as slaves," she says. "If the hills must fall, they will fall with our names upon them." And so begins a new chapter in the Ilocano revolt. One not led by the cry of a man, but by the quiet resolve of a woman whose sorrow has turned to command. She reorganizes the scattered rebels. The camps, once broken by confusion, come alive again. Smoke rises from hidden fires in the hills. Men sharpen bolos. Women sew banners and cook rice for soldiers. Letters are sent through secret routes, calling allies from the nearby provinces of Obra and Candon. Each message carries the same seal. A small, crude drawing of a sun above a mountain, and below it a single letter, G. In the evenings, Gabriela walks among the campfires. She eats with her soldiers, listens to their fears, tends to the wounded. Her presence becomes a kind of prayer. Some whisper that Diego's spirit rides beside her. Others say she has become his spirit. But Gabriela knows better. The dead do not lead the living. The living must carry the dead. Rain comes again, drenching the slopes, but still they train. Arrows hiss through the fog, swords flash in the dim light. She rides along the ridge, her black cloak billowing behind her like a wing. She has learned the language of the mountains. How sound carries, how mist conceals, how silence can strike harder than steel. Her strategies are not drawn from books but from instinct, from listening to the land and to the hearts of her people. At night, when the fires dim, she sometimes opens Diego's old maps. His handwriting winds across the paper. Plans for a free Ilocos, dreams now stained by time and blood. Her fingers trace the lines, and she feels the ache of love like an ember beneath her ribs. Yet instead of weeping, she closes the map, mounts her horse, and rides into the dark. Movement is her mourning. Resolve is her requiem. Soon, word spreads beyond the valleys. A woman leads the revolt, a widow commands an army. A general rides in black upon a white horse. Spanish friars dismiss it as heresy. A woman cannot lead. But the soldiers who face her in the hills whisper otherwise. They call her La Generala. In Vegan, the colonial officials tremble. Orders are sent to crush this new threat. Yet in the towns and villages, people rise quietly, emboldened by her name. Farmers leave their ploughs. Fishermen trade nets for spears. The rebellion becomes not just Diego's dream, but the people's, sustained by the belief that if she dares to stand, they can too. Still, Gabriela knows the odds. The Spanish forces are vast, their weapons superior. Her men are few, her supplies thin. But she measures power differently. Empires, she believes, are built on obedience, revolutions on memory. And memory, of injustice, of love, of hope, cannot be killed by bullets. One night, before a coming battle, she stands alone by the river. The moon casts silver upon the water. She removes her gloves and dips her hands into the current. The cold bites, but it clears her thoughts. She whispers into the wind, not as a soldier, but as a woman who has carried too much loss. If I must fall, she murmurs, let it be as light falls, quietly, but everywhere. Behind her, the sound of footsteps. One of her lieutenants approaches, hesitant. The men await your orders, Generala. She turns, her face calm. Then we ride at dawn. When morning comes, she is already on horseback, eyes fixed toward the horizon. The mist parts before her, revealing the narrow trails that wind toward the lowlands. Her troops follow in silence, their faith unspoken but steady. For they do not see in her the frailty the Spaniards mock. They see the endurance of their mothers, the patience of their land, the courage that blooms after loss. The white horse rears, the black cloak ripples like a shadow breaking free from grief. And with that motion, the rebellion breathes again. In the quiet that follows, the people of Ilocos will remember this image. A widow in armor, her sorrow transformed into steel. History will call her brave, but bravery is too small a word. What she carries is something rarer. The stillness of a soul that refuses to break. For Gabriela, love has become legacy. Grief has become command. And the hills that once mourned now echo with her vow that no empire, however vast, can silence the heart that has already faced loss and learned to live beyond it. Night will soon fall over Abra, where her courage will be tested again. But for now, the mountains hold their breath, waiting for the sound of her next dawn. And somewhere in the distance, thunder stirs, the first whisper of the siege to come. The mountains rise like an unbroken sea of green, their slopes breathing mist and memory. It is here, among the pines and the winding rivers, that Gabriela Silang becomes a ghost the empire cannot catch. The roads that once carried Spanish soldiers into villages now serve as her veins, paths of resistance pulsing beneath the vast skin of the land. She rides at dawn, her black cloak streaked with dew. The air is cold, thin with the scent of pine and earth. Behind her, the small band of fighters follows in silence. Some are farmers, others laborers, all bound by the same vow, freedom, or death that carries meaning. They move not as an army, but as the land itself, vanishing when sought, reappearing where least expected. The Spanish call her La Viuda Rebelda, the rebel widow. But to those who fight beside her, she is simply Generala. She does not shout commands, she listens. She knows the rhythm of the forest, how its silence can betray or protect. She knows where the fog thickens, how the rivers bend, how sound carries between cliffs. Her war is not one of numbers but of knowing, of listening so deeply that even the mountains seem to breathe in her favor. When the soldiers camp by the ridges, she waits until night. Her troops descend like wind through the trees. A flicker of torches, the hiss of arrows. Then they disappear before the echo of their presence fades. To the Spaniards, it feels like fighting the air itself. They burn villages, hoping to draw her out, but she is never there. She is always elsewhere, already watching, already planning. By day, she walks among her people. She tends the wounded, bandages their hands, listens to their fears. Her leadership is not of command alone. It is of care. When a young boy trembles before his first battle, she kneels and places a hand upon his shoulder. Fear, she says softly, means your heart still remembers life. Hold on to it, but let it guide your courage, not your retreat. Her presence steadies them, her voice a compass pointing not to victory, but to dignity. Supplies are scarce, their food runs low, and weapons are few. Yet what they lack in metal, they make up for in will. Bows are carved from bamboo, traps set along narrow trails. They learn from the land, from its patience, from its silence. Every leaf becomes a shield, every stone a soldier. At dusk, they light no fires. Instead, they gather beneath the moonlight, whispering prayers that sound like leaves rustling. The faith that once belonged to friars now finds a new altar, the mountain itself. For Gabriela, the forest becomes both church and fortress. The psalms of her youth still echo in her heart, but their meaning has changed. Now, salvation is not found in heaven, but in freedom, carved into the soil by those willing to fight for it. Sometimes, in the hush between raids, she allows herself a moment to remember Diego, his laughter, his letters, his dream. The memory hurts like a wound that has forgotten how to close, yet it also sharpens her purpose. Love, she thinks, does not end. It transforms. It becomes the light by which one endures the dark. The Spaniards grow desperate. From Vigan to Obra, they send detachments to hunt her down. Rumors travel faster than their soldiers. Some say she can vanish into mist, that her horse leaves no tracks, that bullets bend away from her. But Gabriela knows there is no magic in this. Only discipline, faith, and the knowledge that courage, too, can be invisible. When storms come, she moves through them. Rain blinds her enemies, but clears her path. Her cloak clings heavy to her shoulders, soaked through. Yet she rides forward, a dark shape against the silver veil of rain. The sound of thunder hides the pounding of hooves. Her men follow, guided by the glint of her blade, the only star they need. Between battles she writes small notes, rolled into scraps of palm leaf carried by trusted couriers to neighboring villages. Stand ready, they read. The mountains still live. These words, though few, ripple through the north like a secret heartbeat. Her army, though small, becomes a movement of whispers and echoes. Wherever Spanish patrols march, they find footprints that lead nowhere. The hills, once mere landscape, now rise as her allies. The rivers sing of her. The people hide her with their silence. To live for Gabriela's cause is to live for something unseen yet deeply felt. The breath of freedom stirring beneath the weight of empire. One night, she stands on a ridge overlooking the valley. Below, Spanish fires flicker like dying stars. Above, the moon slips through a quilt of clouds. She breathes deeply, feeling the damp wind against her face. Each breath reminds her she is still alive, still part of something larger than vengeance. This is not a war of hate, she tells herself. It is a war of remembering that once this land belonged to its people. A rustle behind her. One of her scouts approaches. They are moving again. Generala, he whispers. How many? Too many to count. She smiles faintly, turning toward the faint light of dawn. Then we must move faster than counting. They disappear before sunrise, shadows among shadows, carried by the pulse of the earth. Weeks turn into months. Hunger gnaws, exhaustion deepens, yet the fire in her eyes does not fade. She becomes less woman, more legend, the embodiment of endurance. Those who glimpse her speak of calm eyes beneath a storm-dark sky, of a leader who rides without fear, who never raises her voice yet commands with silence. But inside that silence leaves something human: fatigue, longing, grief. When alone, she speaks softly to the night as though Diego still rides beside her. We are still here, she whispers, and the hills remember. The sound of cicadas swells around her. The trees bow with wind. Somewhere below, the river carries the ashes of battle downstream toward the sea. Her fight is far from over, yet she knows each day of resistance, however small, is a seed. One day, even if she falls, others will rise from this soil, fed by the courage she has sown. In the twilight, her silhouette blends with the forest, black upon green, moving through mist. The Spaniards may search the valleys for her name, but they will never find it written in surrender. For Gabriela Silang is no longer just a leader. She is the mountain's breath, the echo of freedom carried by the wind. Soon, the whispers of the hills will lead her north to Abra, to the place where endurance meets its final test. But tonight, as the stars gather over the sleeping land, she remains unbroken. A flame still moving through the dark, searching for the dawn. The wind changes in Abra. It carries the scent of gunpowder and pine, the mingled breath of defiance and doom. Gabriela Silang knows this smell too well. It clings to her cloak, to her horse's mane, to the very air that has followed her since the rebellion began. The hills that once sheltered her now tremble with the weight of armies. The Spanish have come, marching north with rifles, bayonets, and the unyielding pride of empire. But Gabriela does not flee. She gathers her men in the shadow of the Cordillera, where the rivers curl like veins through stone. The camp is weary, their rations nearly gone. The nights are long, filled with the rustle of leaves and the quiet fear that sits beside every fire. Yet when she walks among them, the soldiers straighten their backs, for in her presence fatigue becomes devotion. Abra will hold, she tells them, her voice soft but certain. We have no fort, no cannons, only each other. But that is enough. She stands before the map they have drawn on the ground. A river sketched in ash, a mountain traced with her finger. Every line is fragile, every plan uncertain. Yet she moves with the calm of one who has already accepted what the dawn will bring. Before the sun rises, she prays, not to be spared, but to be steady. The rosary beads she carries are worn smooth from years of use. Each prayer feels like a heartbeat. Around her, the world sleeps restlessly, soldiers murmuring in dreams, the horse shifting its weight, the soft chorus of crickets fading into the distance. When the first light touches the ridges, Gabriela mounts her horse, her hair unbound, catches the wind like a black banner. The men watch in silence. She wears no helmet, no armor but her resolve. Below, the enemy gathers, ranks of soldiers in red coats and polished muskets, their bayonets glinting like a sea of mirrors. The valley echoes with their drums. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening not to the sound of war, but to the memory of Diego's voice. "If we fall," he once said, "let it be forward." The cannons begin. The first blast shatters the morning calm. Birds rise from the trees in a frenzy of wings. The mountains swallow the thunder and give it back in echoes. Gabriela lifts her sword. The air thickens with smoke and cries. Her horse surges forward, hooves pounding the earth. Behind her, her men charge, not an army, but a chorus of hearts refusing silence. The battle unfolds like a storm. The rebels strike from the ridges, firing from behind trees and rocks, vanishing before the Spaniards can answer. But the enemy's numbers are vast. Their cannons pound the hillside, tearing through the soil, sending showers of earth and pine needles into the air. Gabriela rides through the chaos, her cloak streaked with mud, her sword glinting like a shard of light in the haze. She calls out to her men, not to command, but to remind them they are not forgotten. Her voice cuts through the noise, steady as the rhythm of the earth. "Hold your ground! For Ilocos! For our people!" And for a moment it seems possible that courage alone can bend history. But courage, though fierce, is mortal. By noon, the sun burns white in the smoke. The rebels' ammunition runs low. The wounded cry out, their blood mingling with the river below. Gabriela dismounts, kneels beside a fallen soldier. A boy barely old enough to fight. His breath is shallow, his eyes searching the sky. She takes his hand. "You fought bravely," she whispers. He smiles faintly. "Did we win, Generala?" Her answer is silence. Only the wind replies, moving through the trees. When she rises, her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of so many lives entrusted to her. She looks toward the mountains, their peaks veiled in smoke. Every inch of her body aches, yet her spirit does not yield. The Spaniards press forward. The rebels retreat deeper into the ravines. From the ridge, Gabriela watches as flames consume their camp. Tents collapsing, flags burning, the scent of ash filling the air. It is the smell of ending, of something precious slipping beyond reach. Still, she does not cry. She has no tears left for loss, only the steady fire of remembrance. By dusk, the sky turns crimson. The sound of cannon fire fades into the distance. Gabriela and the few who remain withdraw into the mountains. Their wounds bleed freely, their footsteps leave dark stains upon the path. The once living forest now lies scarred, trees splintered, birds gone silent. They find shelter in a cave beside a stream. The men collapse, too tired even to speak. Gabriela removes her cloak, lays it over a shivering soldier. Then she sits by the entrance, watching the last light fade from the valley. For the first time, the enormity of solitude begins to settle upon her. She thinks of Diego, his laughter, his faith. She thinks of the people of Ilocos, of the women rising before dawn to tend the fields, of the men who once sang as they built roads for foreign masters. She thinks of freedom, that elusive, fragile promise that has guided every step of her life. And she wonders, just for a breath, if she has done enough. The stream beside her catches the moonlight, running silver over stones. She dips her hands into it, washing away the soot and blood. The water is cold, but it clears her thoughts. In its flow, she feels something eternal, the persistence of life even in defeat. Tomorrow she will decide their next move, perhaps to hide deeper in the mountains, perhaps to fight again. The rebellion may be breaking, but it is not yet gone. As long as breath remains, the dream will not die. The wind outside sighs through the pine trees. Gentle now, almost tender, it reminds her of home, of the hills of Santa, where she once ran barefoot as a child. The memory softens her heart. She smiles faintly, realizing that the same earth that bore her now bears her struggle. The same land that gave her grief also gives her grace. Somewhere in the darkness below, the Spanish light their victory fires, but in the cave above, another fire still burns, small, fragile and unseen. Gabriela closes her eyes. The world outside may call this defeat, but she knows better. What she fights for cannot be measured in battles won or lost. It lives in the refusal to kneel, in the courage to rise again even when the night seems endless. She whispers a final prayer, not for deliverance, but for endurance. "Let them think the hills are silent," she murmurs. "We will speak again when the wind remembers our names." The mountains listen. The river moves. History, somewhere far ahead, waits to catch her echo. Soon, that echo will fall into the hands of betrayal, and the chains of capture will tighten around her fate. But for this night, within the hush of Abra's wounded hills, Gabriela Silang remains. The last flame still burning against the empire's dark. The wind has turned against her. In the dim grey of morning, the hills of Abra lie hushed beneath a sky of ash and silence. The scent of gunpowder still lingers from battles now lost to exhaustion and dwindling faith. Gabriela stands at the edge of a narrow ravine, the white of her horse dulled with dust and sweat. Around her, the remnants of her army, farmers, sons, brothers, breathe quietly, their eyes hollowed by hunger and sleepless nights. They have fought for weeks among the mountains, slipping between forests and rivers, striking and vanishing like shadows. But shadows cannot hide forever. The Spanish have learned the terrain, they have learned patience. And now, as the sun edges above the mist, Gabriela feels the weight of inevitability, like a storm that has circled too long and finally decides to break. Whispers reach her of betrayal, a familiar name spoken with uncertainty. One of her own, perhaps wary of fear, has made a bargain for safety. There is no anger in her, only the still ache of knowing that revolutions do not die from defeat. They die from within. She looks to the mountains one last time, tracing their ridges with her gaze, as if memorizing their shape. Here, among these peaks, she has found the fiercest form of freedom, a kind that cannot be given or taken, only lived. Every echo of hoofbeats in these valleys once sang her name. Now, that music fades into the sound of soldiers approaching. Her horse shifts beneath her, sensing what comes. She strokes its neck, whispering softly, "There will be no more battles." The enemy is near, and the people she swore to protect are scattered, wounded, hiding among the trees. To fight now would be to burn what little remains. When the Spanish soldiers appear through the mist, their armor glints like dull silver. They move cautiously, aware of her legend. The widow who became a general, the woman whose presence could stir men to rise against an empire. But she does not resist. She raises her hands, not as surrender, but as quiet acceptance. The clink of chains replaces the jangle of reins, cold metal around warm wrists. She is led away from the hills that once hid her, down the winding roads toward Vegan. The journey is long. Villages line the path. Towns she once rode through as a symbol of defiance, places where children had waved palm leaves and women had sung her name. Now, as she passes in shackles, a hush falls over the people. They do not shout or protest. They simply bow their heads, their silence heavy with reverence and sorrow. Gabriela keeps her eyes forward. Every step is measured, each breath an act of endurance. She feels the sting of humiliation, but beneath it flows a strange peace. She has done what she could. The cause is not lost. It merely waits like a seed buried deep beneath winter ground. At dusk, the convoy halts near a river. The soldiers rest, and Gabriela is allowed to drink. The water is cold and clear, its surface trembling with the light of a dying sun. She looks into it and sees not her reflection, but the ghost of Diego, his laughter, his dreams, his unfinished revolution. She closes her eyes, and for a moment, she is back in their small house in Vegan, when love was a rebellion of its own. Night deepens. The soldiers light torches. Somewhere in the dark, a bird calls, a lone, lingering sound that echoes off the valley walls. It reminds her of the mountains again, of the nights she stood beneath their stars, believing that courage could bend the course of empire. When dawn returns, the march continues. The roads grow busier. News of her capture has spread like wind through the north. Women emerge from their homes to watch her pass. Some clutch rosaries, others hold their children close, whispering her name like a prayer. She does not meet their eyes, not out of shame, but to spare them the pain of seeing hers. In Vegan, the bells toll as she enters the plaza. The sound rolls across the rooftops, solemn and unending. She is taken to the very square where she once stood beside Diego, where they dreamed of freedom as if it were a promise written in the air. Now the same square will hold her final memory. Inside her cell, light filters through the narrow bars, thin strands of gold cutting through the gloom. She kneels and prays, not for rescue, but for remembrance. That her people might remember that once a woman refused to kneel. She knows what awaits her. Execution, they will call it, justice, perhaps, in the language of empire. But history will hear another word, martyrdom, the transformation of flesh into symbol, of grief into strength. Her guards avoid her gaze. They whisper when they think she cannot hear. Some are young enough to have been children when she first led her army. She sees their fear and she forgives it. No one is born ready to face a woman who walks toward death without trembling. That night, thunder murmurs in the distance. Rain begins to fall softly against the stone walls. Gabriela closes her eyes and listens. Each drop feels like a heartbeat of the land she loves, a reminder that even as bodies fall, the earth endures. In the silence that follows, she smiles faintly. The fight has outlived her. Somewhere in the highlands, among the hidden villages and whispering forests, there will be others who remember. Others who will rise. She tilts her head toward the sound of the rain, as if listening to the voice of a future she will never see. Night gathers around her cell, but the quiet glow within endures. A light not of defiance, but of faith. And from that stillness rises a question that will outlive her. When a dream is chained, does it die? Or does it wait, patient as dawn, to be born again? The morning of her death is unbearably bright. Vegan wakes under a sky so clear it feels merciless. Blue stretched over roofs and stone, blue like a blade. The church bells toll, not for mass this time, but for the last act of rebellion. Dust drifts from the plaza where gallows stand waiting, the wood raw and splintered in the light. The crowd gathers, silent, uncertain, as if the entire province has forgotten how to breathe. Gabriela walks at the center of it all. Chains circle her wrists, but her steps are slow, deliberate, almost ritual. The soldiers beside her shift uneasily, unsure how to hold the space between reverence and command. She is their prisoner, yet she moves like a queen returning to her throne. The wind carries the smell of sweat and sugarcane. A child cries somewhere near the edge of the crowd. A mother hushes him, trembling. Some avert their eyes, afraid to look at the woman they once called Generala. Others cannot look away. Her face is calm, her gaze steady. Not proud, not broken, only vast, as if she already stands beyond the reach of what will happen here. She remembers the mountains of Abra, how the fog would cling to the slopes at dawn, how the river would gleam like liquid silver. She remembers the thunder of hooves, Diego's voice calling through the trees, his laughter before battle, his hand brushing hers before sleep. Every memory now burns quietly within her, a final fire no empire can extinguish. The friar assigned to her leans close, murmuring a prayer in Spanish. His voice trembles. "Confess," he whispers. "Seek forgiveness." But Gabriela only shakes her head. She has confessed to nothing but love. For her husband, for her land, for the dream that men called impossible. Her silence is not rebellion now. It is release. She no longer fights the chains. They are nothing compared to what she has already endured. The governor's envoy reads the decree. Her crimes, her sentence, her supposed redemption through death. Each word floats heavy in the air, echoing against the convent walls. Treason, rebellion, sedition, words that have tried to define her, cage her, erase her. But she listens as though hearing distant thunder. Familiar, inevitable, already past. As the noose is placed around her neck, the world seems to narrow into stillness. A bird circles high above the plaza. A cloud passes, dimming the light for a heartbeat. The air hums with a strange reverence, not for the empire, but for the quiet strength of a woman who has come to the end without bowing. She looks out at the crowd, at the farmers who once brought food to her camp, at the women who stitched her banner in secret, at the children whose laughter once broke through the clatter of muskets. For them, she smiles, a small, almost invisible curve of the lips, the last kindness she can offer. In that moment, she is no longer the widow, the rebel, the prisoner. She is the still point where all grief becomes grace. The executioner hesitates. Even he feels it, that she is not afraid, that her calm unnerves the very machinery of empire. Someone shouts an order. The rope tightens. The air holds its breath. And then silence. No cry, no curse, no struggle. Only the sudden, unbearable quiet of something eternal passing into myth. The crowd does not cheer. No victory can be drawn from this. The soldiers fidget, sweating beneath their helmets. The friar lowers his head, crossing himself. But among the people, the farmers, the mothers, the hidden rebels, something begins to stir. Not noise, not words, but a kind of awakening. They will remember this silence. They will carry it in their hearts, in their stories. In the lullabies they whisper to their children, the tale of the woman who stood before death, as though it were only another door. By midday, her body is cut down. The sun beats on the plaza stones. Life resumes its uneasy rhythm. Vendors return to their stalls, soldiers to their barracks, priests to their chapels. Yet the air does not feel the same. The gallows stand empty, but the emptiness hums with presence. That night, a wind rises from the west. It moves through the sugarcane, through the acacia trees, through the narrow alleys of vegan. It lifts the scent of burnt oil and the faint memory of tears. In the darkness, the people whisper her name, Gabriela. Some say they see her white horse wandering near the river that night, reins dragging in the mud, eyes glinting with moonlight. Others claim they hear her voice in the hills, soft as prayer, strong as thunder. The friars call it superstition. The soldiers call it unrest. But to those who knew her, it is comfort, proof that courage, once awakened, does not die easily. In the convent courtyard, a novice lights a candle and places it on a windowsill. She has heard the rumors, the stories, the warnings, but she lights it anyway, whispering Para Sabahian, for the country. The flame trembles, small against the night, but steady, and so it begins, the long afterglow of her defiance. Years will pass. The gallows will rot. The plaza will fill with new faces, new rulers, new prayers. Yet under the surface of things, her story will remain, carried in the rhythm of feet marching through time. Generations later, her name will return in the voices of other women. Teachers, farmers, guerrilleros, who find strength in the thought of her. They will not all wear armor, but they will carry her fire in different ways. In every act of courage, a trace of Gabriela walks beside them. Even the empire, vast and confident, cannot erase her. For every monument it builds to its power, there will always be one quiet story of resistance, a reminder that even empires must bow to memory. In a small village in Ilocos, a grandmother tells her granddaughter about a woman who rode through the mountains like a storm and died without fear. The child listens, eyes wide. Was she real? She asks. The grandmother smiles. More than real? She says. She was brave. Outside, the night is gentle. The wind moves through the trees, echoing faintly, a rhythm that sounds almost like a horse's gallop fading into distance. History will call her a rebel. The people will call her a hero, but perhaps she is something more enduring than either. A soul that refused to forget what freedom felt like. And as the centuries turn, her death will no longer be seen as an ending, but as a seed, buried beneath the stones of vegan, waiting for the right generation to rise and bloom. For what is martyrdom, if not the quiet agreement between a mortal heart and eternity? Night gathers once more around the plaza, and the candle on the windowsill burns low, its flame small but unyielding. Beyond the silence of her death, another story waits to be born, the echo after the fall. Silence follows her. After the noose tightens, after the sun dips below the tiled roofs of vegan, the land holds its breath. The mountains, once alive with the clang of blades and the gallop of hooves, fall still. Even the rivers seem to flow more softly, as though afraid to disturb her passing. For a time, Ilocos forgets how to sing. The Spanish soldiers patrol the roads with muskets on their shoulders and fear in their eyes. They have slain a woman, but something unseen still moves through the villages, something that cannot be arrested or hanged. The friars speak of sin and obedience. The governor orders calm. But beneath their decrees, the soil itself murmurs her name. Gabriela, It slips between the cane fields and the quiet kitchens, between rosaries and lullabies. It is not shouted, it is whispered. Whispered by those who watched her die, and by those who never saw her, but feel as if they had. In a small hut by the river, a mother braids her daughter's hair before dawn. She hums a tune she cannot quite remember, a melody that once belonged to rebels. The girl listens, eyes bright with wonder. "Who is the song for?" she asks. The mother smiles faintly. "For a woman who rode with thunder," she says. And just like that, the memory breathes again. In another town, a farmer sharpens his bolo before going to the fields. He does not speak of rebellion, not aloud. But when he looks at the rising sun, he remembers the stories told in hushed voices. How she faced the gallows without fear, how her horse stood still as if listening to her final breath. He wipes his blade, thinking of freedom as something not yet dead, only sleeping. Time passes, seasons turn. The rebellion fades into a chapter too dangerous to read. Yet Gabriela's shadow lingers, not in the halls of the powerful, but in the gestures of the humble, in the way women carry baskets with straight backs, in the way men lift their eyes toward the hills before they pray. There is a kind of grief that grows gentle with time. Her death becomes that kind. In Vegan, the gallows rot and fall. Grass grows over the place where she last stood. The stones of the plaza, once stained with the dust of her final footsteps, are washed clean by rain. Yet when the wind passes through at dusk, it still seems to carry her. A faint echo of a voice that refuses to fade. The friars write her name out of their records. The officials erase her from their reports. But erasure is not the same as forgetting. The people remember differently, not with ink, but with the pulse of story. Years later, in the quiet of an Ilocano kitchen, a young woman will ask her grandmother about the past. Was there ever a woman who fought the Spaniards? The old woman will nod, eyes distant. Yes, she will say softly, a woman who loved, and in loving, learned to fight. The girl will not know the full story, not yet. But she will carry that image, that seed of memory, like a hidden ember. And when her own time comes to choose between silence and courage, she will remember that a woman once stood unbroken in the face of empire. For memory is a strange kind of rebellion. It survives where swords cannot. In the hills, the wind moves again. It slides down through the tobacco terraces, through the narrow paths that once carried soldiers and rebels alike. Sometimes it sounds like breath, sometimes like a song without words. The Ilocos sun rises on another century, the friars' voices fade. The empire itself weakens, then falls, and in the space left behind, stories bloom like wildflowers in forgotten soil. Gabriela's name returns, first in the corners of classrooms, then in the pages of history books written by hands unafraid. She is no longer just the widow of Gabriela Silang. She becomes her own flame, a symbol of what it means to stand, to endure, to love the idea of freedom more than life itself. Her image changes with each generation. For some, she is the warrior in black, the general astride a white horse. For others, she is the calm woman with a quiet voice and eyes that never turned away. In truth, she was both, strength and gentleness intertwined, as they always are in those who fight for something larger than themselves. Now, centuries later, her story drifts like smoke into the present. Statues will rise in her honor, schools will bear her name, movements will claim her courage as their inheritance. But long before these monuments, The truest memorial was always the whisper, the one that refused to die in the mountains of Ilocos. Some nights, when the wind sighs through the cane fields, it feels like the earth itself is exhaling her story softly, endlessly, as if to remind those who still listen that bravery, once born, never truly leaves the world. Because history is not only written in books, it is kept alive in breath, in ritual, in the quiet insistence of remembrance. And so, the silence that once followed her death becomes something else entirely. Not emptiness, but echo. Not absence, but continuation. The same way a bell's tone lingers long after the clapper has gone still. In Ilocos, before dawn, women still rise early to begin the day. They light their fires, tie their hair, and step into the fields with quiet strength. They do not speak her name aloud, not always. But in their endurance she leaves. The revolution she began in love did not die with her. It only changed form. It became a song, a story, a lineage of courage passed from mother to daughter, from generation to generation, carried in the rhythm of work. The patience of hope, the wind in the north still moves through the mountains. And if you listen closely, it carries the faintest whisper, not of sorrow, but of promise. The silence after her death becomes a pulse beneath the soil, a quiet breathing of history waiting to rise again. And from that stillness, a new dawn begins to form, the awakening of a people and the woman who became a nation. Time, like the sea, has a way of smoothing everything it touches. Wars turn to stories, rebellions to memories, and names, if they are not spoken, fade into dust, but not hers. More than 2 centuries have passed since the gallows at Vigan burned bright beneath the Philippine sun. The Spanish Empire that once ruled her world is long gone, its banners lowered, its cathedrals turned to stone witnesses of passing centuries. Yet somewhere in the pulse of the islands, her name still moves, like wind brushing through cane fields, like breath over a flame that refuses to die. Gabriela. The syllables rise again, softly at first, in the voices of teachers, in the songs of school children, in the pages of history books opened under flickering classroom lights. Her story, once whispered in fear, now lives in daylight. It crosses chalkboards and stages, retold in words that tremble with reverence, the first Filipina to lead a revolt against empire, the woman who stood unbowed before death. But beyond the titles and the lessons, her spirit lingers in smaller, quieter ways. In every woman who wakes before dawn to work the land. In every voice that refuses to fall silent in the face of injustice. In every act of courage done without witness or reward. These, too, are her revolutions. When the 20th century dawns, the Philippines begins to wake from the long colonial sleep. The people rise again, first against Spain, then against America, later still against their own fears, and in those years of turmoil and hope, her name finds new light. In the 1970s, as the nation struggles under dictatorship, a group of women takes her name, Gabriela. They march through the streets, not with swords or banners of war, but with placards and poems, their voices echoing through Manila's crowded avenues. They fight not for conquest, but for dignity. The right to speak, to work, to live free of fear. When the soldiers see them, they remember the stories from childhood of a woman who once defied their ancestors. When the friars hear her name in chants, it rings differently now, not rebellion, but resurrection. History circles back, and the woman from Ilocos stands once more, not in flesh, but in spirit. Yet the beauty of Gabriela Silang's legacy is not in her return as symbol, but in her transformation into something greater, an idea that moves through time, unbound by gender, region, or era. She becomes not only the woman who fought, but the vision of what the Philippines might one day be. Fierce in love, steadfast in sorrow, luminous in endurance. In a small classroom in Vigan, a teacher writes her name on the board. The children repeat it, hesitant at first, then clear and proud. Gabriela Silang. The teacher tells them about the mountains, the horse, the fire, the gallows. But more than that, she tells them what it means. That courage is not always loud. That leadership can come from compassion. That freedom begins when one heart refuses to yield. One child asks, "Was she afraid?" The teacher smiles. "Everyone is," she says. But bravery is what happens when love becomes greater than fear. Outside, the wind stirs the trees, rustling like a long-forgotten prayer. Across the archipelago, her image adorns murals, coins, and stamps. Her face, once condemned by empire, now gazes from walls painted by young artists who have never seen Ilocos but feel its pull in their blood. They paint her not as martyr, but as movement. Her hair a banner of smoke and wind, her eyes alive with a vision that transcends time. Even those who do not know her story sense her presence in the rhythm of a drum during a protest, in the rising chant of woman, fight, in the quiet strength of communities who refuse to be broken. She is no longer only the general who rode into battle. She has become a nation's pulse, the heartbeat beneath its scars. But nations, like people, are forgetful. There are times when progress dulls memory, when comfort breeds amnesia, and in those times her story becomes vital again. It asks, gently but firmly, what does it mean to be free? Is freedom a banner raised once and forgotten, or is it a way of living day after day in truth? In the years of independence, the Philippines struggles with that question. Power changes hands, injustices return in new faces, and the dreams of the past grow heavy with disillusionment. Yet each generation rediscovers her, each time with different eyes. To the revolutionaries, she is a fighter. To the women of labor and protest, she is a sister. To historians, she is a question of courage. To poets, she is an unfinished song. Through them all, she endures. Because she was never merely a figure of the past. She was, and is, a way of seeing the world. That resistance can be tender. That leadership can be born of love. That a woman's voice can alter the course of a nation's history. The plaza where she died is now a place of pilgrimage. Plaza Salcedo, named after a conquistador, carries the echo of her footsteps. Tourists walk past the fountains and statues without knowing what once happened there. But sometimes, when the wind shifts, the story finds them anyway. A guide's voice softens, a listener's heart stirs, and once more, she leaves. In Ilocos, the mountains remain, ancient, unchanging, their slopes still lined with tobacco and corn. The rivers still gleam like silver under the sun. The people still rise early, still bow their heads in prayer, still carry the same mixture of hardship and hope. But now they do so with her name woven quietly into their endurance. Because the story of Gabriela Silang is not the story of one woman. It is the story of a people learning to see themselves, brave, unbending, capable of beauty even in the face of ruin. Her life teaches that revolutions do not end with victory or defeat. They continue in every heart that chooses honesty over fear, dignity over silence, compassion over cruelty. And so, as the centuries turn, her story becomes something luminous, not a legend to be worshipped, but a mirror to be looked into. Every nation needs such mirrors. When the Philippines looks into hers, it sees what it might yet become. Not perfect, not finished, but forever reaching toward justice, toward grace, toward the light that once shone in the eyes of a woman who rode from the hills and never bowed. Her horse, her armor, her fire, these are symbols now, but her truest legacy is quieter. The belief that freedom belongs to everyone, and that courage, once kindled, can outlast even empire. Night returns to the mountains of Ilocos, soft and endless. Somewhere in the wind, her name still travels, not as a cry of battle, but as a lullaby for a nation still learning how to be free. And so, the story fades into the hush of night, the tale of Gabriela Silang, the woman who once stood against an empire, whose courage flickered like a small, steady flame against the wind of centuries. Her footsteps have long quieted on the cobbled paths of vegan, yet somehow they still echo, not in the sound of war, but in the quiet strength of those who dare to hope. Every age has its darkness. Every age has its light. And somewhere between the two, a single life, lived bravely, lived with love, becomes a lantern for those who come after. Gabriela's story reminds us that courage is not born of the battlefield alone. It begins in the still, trembling heart, where one whisper of no more becomes the song of generations. As the candle of her memory burns quietly in time, we are reminded that history is never just what happened, it is what endures. It lives in the way we speak of those who came before, in the quiet reverence of nights like this, when the past leans close and hums softly through the dark. Thank you for sharing this quiet hour with me tonight. In this small space of stillness across cities and oceans, you have listened. And by listening, you have kept her flame alive. You are part of a long, gentle chain of remembrance that reaches farther than we can see. Now, as the night deepens around you, let the story rest. Let your thoughts soften, like ash after fire, like sea after storm. May your breath find its rhythm again. May your dreams carry you through fields of light, through memories that do not fade, through the hush of history's lullaby. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in and time learns to whisper. If this story brought you peace, you're always welcome to return whenever the world feels too loud. Sleep well, dear listener. The flame does not sleep. It only softens, glowing quietly through the night, waiting for another dawn to remember.